One thing I would love to get your take on is I recently had this monster. It looks like this podcast is turning into another monster. Um, but I had this recent monster of an episode with Eric Helms and Mike Israetel on training frequency, and we ended up chatting about a lot of other things like volume and how volume changes with training gauge, which I'll also want to get into a little bit later. Ooh, damn, that will be a cool topic. Okay, something to look forward to in the next couple of minutes. But first, one thing that Eric said is that when you look at the elite pool of natural lifters, and I guess it also applies to enhanced lifters, what you tend to see is that the best people tend to be either those that tolerate a crap ton of volume and they're just crushing themselves in the gym with an ungodly number of sets, and they are just fine, and they are looking at all the other people, like maybe yourself even, and say like, oh my god, you're so weak, like why can't you do what I do? And then there is the other camp of people that are kind of the exact opposite, who tend to get banged up a lot by any unit of volume, but they also respond really well to that. And basically, those two extremes make up the elite of bodybuilding. And there are not that many people in the middle. Like, those tend to be more mediocre as well. Would you agree with what Eric said, that characterization?
I think there is a common sort of unifying feature of both of those groups, and as you just pointed to it, is those people train hard and they train within their recovery range. So Jeff Alpert's, and I can't speak for him, but what you said, he trains as hard as he possibly can without incurring chronic overuse injuries and just too many injuries that just set him back. And then there's just the genetically gifted. So I don't know if I've seen that, but I would say that, see, in the maybe in the enhanced realm, there are people who just grow. They're so gifted. So you kind of have like kind of a blurring, whereas because they've got the gear is there helping. Maybe they're responding quite well to that. You can have people that are really advanced and good upper echelon bodybuilders, who got there because they're particularly responsive to the combination of both training, not necessarily as hard as maybe everyone else would train, but the training plus the gear gets them a long ways. So, and then of course they stand out simply because they're enhanced as being bigger than almost any natural top echelon bodybuilder would be. So I think you get sort of a blurring, at that in the enhanced ranks, where you've got some people who are like, I mean, Paul Dillett is an example of someone everyone always points to. It's just like he's never, like, no one's ever caught video of Paul, and I've never heard anyone say that Paul Dillett just trained like an animal. He was just like ridiculously gigantic. He was an absolute monster. And that was, it seems like it was genetics, not due to raw effort. But yeah, I think there's something to say for that. Like, literally, there's the more you can, the opposite side of the coin. If you can't recover from the training, then the training stimulus is null and void, really. So your ability to grow, and this is something that is sort of built into the notion of volume being the quote unquote driver of muscle hypertrophy, and I really want to address that terminology because I think that plants a seed in people's minds that doesn't provide the context of all the other important aspects. That makes it seem like literally that volume is in the driver's seat. It is at the steering wheel in control of the acceleration and the brakes. The driver, I mean, that literally, when you say that basically says it's in charge of your training destiny. And that's too much. But back to the idea of recovery, if you got someone like Jeff Alpert's or versus Doug Miller, they have to be able to recover from whatever their training stimulus is. And you can train really hard and not do a lot and make great progress. That's absolutely true. I mean, Dorian Yates had his own genetic gifts, but he didn't train with as much volume as many of his contemporaries. And Ronnie Coleman was sort of the opposite of that. And they both obviously were recovering from what they were doing. So I could see that, that possibility being the case. I mean, I don't know. I think one of the things too, it's hard to know, and I don't know how Eric came up with that observation, but maybe, I mean, because I know he talks with a lot of natural bodybuilders, so I'm in no way doubting that, there's some validity there, but you don't tend to, like, if you're going to look at someone and say, wow, that guy's, what are we seeing in terms of training? What would grab our attention? What would sort of come to notoriety? And it would be the guys like Doug Miller, who just train ungodly hard and do lots of volume, or the people that are sort of at the other end of the spectrum. We tend to look kind of to the outliers. It's not like, you're going to get, everyone's going to want to click on John Smith trains with moderate volume and moderate intensity. Like, okay, great. I'm going to pass that one right by. I'm not interested in that. Like, you want to say, how in the world does Jeff grow so much when he only does 3 working sets a week? And Doug Miller does 30, and they all look like this. So those are the things that grab our attention. I'm sure there are people in between, but I think at those two ends, like, literally, that's the commonality is effort. And I've sort of always thought of it in this way for many, many years, is if you look at why is resistance exercise, just from a very, very global perspective, why is resistance exercise such a potent stimulus for muscle growth? One kind of, there's something bizarre about it. It's the picking up and the lowering. There's some evidence really kind of suggests that the eccentric is important. You can grow from isometric contractions. You can grow from concentric only contractions, but the eccentric is important too. So there's something about the picking up and lowering that, is sort of a unique, I think, for producing the muscle growth. But the thing about resistance training compared to what people do throughout the rest of their day-to-day life is that it's an extraordinary and extreme effort. Literally, unless you're working construction or maybe like you're a mover, or you've got some like really heavy-duty manual labor job, you're never doing anything that is even really remotely similar in terms of extent of effort that you do in the gym. I mean, even someone like who's like, lifting heavy things, like literally they're trying to do all they can to, use dollies and, pallet jacks and lifts and, get the best angle and leverage on things so they don't have to overexert themselves. And they want to do one lift. You're picking up something big because you got to put in the back of a truck. You do a singular, obviously 1 second lift, and if it's going to last maybe 3 seconds, if it's lasting like 5 or 10, or if it's a grinder, you're probably, you're not going to last very long on that job because you're going to be dropping shit so often. You make it easy enough so that it's always safe, even if it's a high effort during the day-to-day manual labor types of jobs. Whereas you go in the gym, you're intentionally picking up, you're trying to push yourself to the point where, like, literally you've got failure at the muscular level. That's so far beyond what we normally are accustomed to, that I think is sort of at the heart and the root of the reason why it's such a great stimulus and stress to produce muscle growth. So that's the key feature, is that effort. And if you first, that's why when you go in and you start training for the first 6 months, a year, 2 years, growth is phenomenal in people that are at least responders. But eventually you have to like, it has to be something that's beyond your comfort level. It has to be new and novel. And doing sets of this at the same effort level with more volume does create novelty in the volume sense, but I think in many cases that's limited. So that's sort of my take on it.
Yeah. So I'm glad that you finished on that note. That's a very nice way to prompt me to my next question, which is how to actually facilitate that, because and like I mentioned before, you're not so much in the low volume and high intensity, or high volume and whatever intensity camp. You're the high effort guy, if I understand your kind of ethos well. So do you think, and I know a couple of people in the industry like you in that sense, like Joe Bennett, the hypertrophy coach, is similar, I believe. Maybe Jordan Peters is similar, but I'm not that familiar with his work on this. But do you think that those two approaches, so increasing the volume component and maybe leaving the intensity of effort component largely unchanged, is equivalent to simply taking the sets that you're already doing and increasing how much you can get out of those individual sets. Do you think that those are largely equivalent in terms of how much extra growth they will produce, or do you think that one is inherently superior?
I think, although it would be great if I could just bifurcate things and give you a kind of a yes or no binary answer, I think it really so much strongly depends on the person. So there are going to be people who train hard, who literally are going to simply, they're not going to up the training effort level in a way that would create for them the best environment for growth, because they simply don't want to do that. They're simply not going to go there. And for those people, volume modulation is probably going to be a better option. So train hard. And the volume answer is probably a good one for them. And I think, like Mike Israetel obviously has become like, he's the volume king as far as conceptualizing and putting this idea to work. And I think Mike's even said to a lot of the people that he works with are beginners and intermediates. So for some people, yes, that's going to be the way to go. And I'll tell a story. I've told it before, but it's just kind of a funny one. It's I still laugh when I think about it. So years ago, when I owned my gym, we were just starting out, and I think I'd been sick, and I finally took some time off, or I was coming back and sort of restarting DC training. And the first trainer there at my gym back in Arizona wanted to do this with me, and he's like was always asking me like, I want to put on some size, I really want to grow, and I'm like, okay, well, let's train together. We'll set aside some time. We'll train at this time of the day. The gym's quiet. Blah blah blah. We're going to go after it. So we went through, and we're doing the dog crap training, DC training, 2-way split. And we started with the leg day, and you finish that day with a Widowmaker. Are you familiar with the dog crap Widowmakers, 20 rep sets?
Yeah.
Okay, so we get through the workout, and we get to the end there, and we do the heavy sets, and I think we're on a Smith squat actually. And I do my Widowmaker on my 20 rep Widowmaker, and I get done, and it was a pretty decent Widowmaker. I really like doing those, and I literally kind of crawl out from under the bar, and catch my wind. I look over, and he's still sort of sitting on the bench there, and I said, so what weight do you want on the bar? And he just looks at me and says, I'm not doing that. And I'm like, what? He's like, no, I'm done. I'm not doing that. I don't want to do that. And I'm like, oh, okay. He's like, it's like, no, I don't think I want to do this DC training thing. This isn't for me. It's just too much. I'm like, okay. And that was it. And that was the last time we trained together. He didn't even finish the workout because he's like, he saw the writing on the wall. He's like, this guy's a fucking animal. He's like, this is not how I want to train. And so he just didn't do it. And it was great. I loved the honesty, and he's a phenomenal guy. And he was there at the gym the entire time I owned it. So some people just aren't suited for that. And other people don't have a governor that can hold them back. I learned this myself many years ago. I would try high volume stuff, and I just couldn't keep myself from taking as many sets as possible to failure. I'm better at this now. So I don't know. Are you familiar with fortitude training, my training system?
Yeah. I have it.
Okay, good. So there that I have 3 volume tiers that I set out. So there's definitely a tremendous variability in the amount of volume that people can handle. And when training as hard as they can. And some of that, though, is a function of training as hard as you can. Because as we said, what is maximal effort for one person is a breeze warm-up walk in the park set for another person. So that could be part of it. Some of it can just be inherent differences in recovery abilities. And I've seen this sort of indirectly in years past when I did a lot of muscle damage, muscle soreness work when I was in grad school. And we'd have people who on paper looked identical in terms of their activity level. They hadn't been resistance trained. Strength levels, body size, we put them through the same sort of muscle insult, eccentric-based damaging exercise protocol, and come back and measure their muscle soreness and their strength loss, and it's all over the place. Just gigantic variability. It's like, why would that be? Well, we can maybe get into there's some genetic reasons in terms of the various things that probably are somewhat explanatory of why that is. But so you've got some people who just can inherently recover better. Some people who dot their I's and cross their T's. They're making sure they're getting their sleep. They don't have jobs that keep them walking around expending energy so they can eat plenty. They're not creating an interference effect by being on their feet and doing manual labor types of things. So they've got everything going for them. And then there's just the factor of some people just are going to have to do more volume because they just don't train as hard. They can't create the insult that others can. They just can't go there. They don't want to. They and it's just not the right answer for them. And literally adherence, sticking with the program and carrying it out and squeezing all the water out of the rock of that program as long as you possibly can while you're making at least reasonable progress, I think is, in the long haul, one of the most important things. Being consistent and be willing to, not program hop and not jump around from strategy to strategy and micro load, for instance, or even, small amounts are what will eventually add up over time. And it can take years for that to happen. But if you just, if you're adding a pound, let's say you add 2 pounds to a lift and you do that lift, 15 times a year, that's 30 years. You do that for 3 years, that's almost 100 pounds to that lift. If that's a 300 to a 400 pound load change in your working sets, that's going to show up in your physique, all other things being equal. So that's kind of where I stand there, is that, volume is going to be the answer for some people, and you can do that, but it's a function of so many other things that it's really hard to say. I wish we could compare one versus the other. There's a way that you could kind of test that experimentally with electrical stimulation, and that just totally takes the effort level side of the equation out, because the contractions are evoked involuntarily by the E-stim. So how hard you want to train doesn't matter. The E-stim is just turned on a certain current, and the muscle contracts maximally.
Yeah. And some component of that is not even necessarily differences in genetics or nervous system characteristics, but for example, if I take myself, I've gone recently more so in the high volume direction, and the reason behind that is actually merely practical, is that I am fairly injury prone. But like my connective tissue is just not very tolerant to super heavy loading. So I know on a number of exercises I could load it more aggressively. Like I know that on some lifts, if you or a Joe Bennett were to look at me and I'm saying like, okay, I'm training, I'm leaving 1 or 2 reps in the tank, maybe you would look at me and say, dude, I guarantee you, if you work together with me for a couple of sessions, you can get 4 more reps out of that. And I would be like, you're probably right, but like I am just scared that I'm going to hurt myself. So I would rather, do a few more sets, a bit more submaximally. My sessions are going to be a bit longer and maybe not as much fun, but that's an effective way for me to stress my muscles, still exhaust them, cause a stimulus. And that's just a practical consideration in my case, for example. So that's something to take into account as well.
Yeah, I mean, like literally, if you do 5 sets and take them all to failure and compare that with 8 sets, and you leave 1 or 2 reps in reserve, you could get the same amount of growth on average for a given person. So that's a totally, and what matters, of course, is what you can, if those 5 sets all to failure break you down, and this is the thing that I sort of alluded to earlier, is that we have to, and this is why the latest Barbalo study is so phenomenal, I think, is that they made these measurements. Let me see if I can pull this up so I can get the numbers right here. Yeah, so they measured 24 weeks out. So they measured it. So it was only pre-12 and 24. I thought they made more measurements, but they had 4 different volume measurements. And at 12 weeks, you see a different picture in terms of what's happening muscle growth wise, because at 24 weeks, in the highest volume group, that's 20 sets per week, for most of what I'm seeing here, they're basically back down to the original muscle thick. There was regression during the second half of the study. So that's the type of thing, that you would of course never do. And this is another perfect example of this. Is if you were working with the clients and you started to see them regress, well, you would do a deload. So you lose some ecological validity in a certain sense, because no one would ever train this way when they're backsliding, probably for the last, 6 weeks of that second 12-week period. They probably recognized what was going on there. It probably was becoming evident in the training efforts. If I use a perceived recovery status scale with my clients now, it's just a 0 to 10 scale, to kind of give them some kind of a stopping point to sort of be mindful of what their recovery status is. And if you started to see all those things kind of going back and the logbooks not moving, well, you would stop. This is really nice that they actually documented this to show that like what happens between the pre and the post measurements could be different than what you would presume if you just thought that the pre to post measurements dictate the trend that's going to continue continue forth forever. So there was literally an overtraining phenomenon here between 12 and 24 weeks in these higher volume groups. So the same thing for you. Like if you were to try to, you would be like overtraining in terms of overuse injuries. Literally, if you tried to do all those failure sets with heavier loads, it's not sustainable. So there'll be a silly approach for you to take. So the practicality of it is that, eventually you have to find ways to, if you want to continue to train heavy, you need to find ways to allow that to happen. And just banging away like some people try to do on exercises they become overly endeared to is not the way to make that happen. Rotating exercises, changing exercise order, things like if squats are your go-to, and you may have to pre-fatigue with other exercises for your legs before you go to squats. So you drop your load 30%, and then you get yourself out of that connective tissue damaging zone with the heavier loads that you found is just not helpful for continue to progress.
Yeah, actually, can we get into exercise selection a little bit?
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so one thing that I've heard you guys talk about in that big episode with Paul Carter is that, a lot of people don't even take that into consideration, that a lot of people are just married to exercises that are thrown out there as the must-haves, like the squat, the bench press, and things like that, and they just don't fit a lot of people. And then maybe their legs are lagging, and their solution is, okay, I'm just gonna do more squats. Like I'm just gonna add sets to my squats, and it's kind of like taking you're taking the wrong medicine and it doesn't work, and then
exactly
taking even more of that. So I'm wondering. Have you had things like that in your training exercises which you had to switch out and that you were kind of emotionally attached to, like a squat or a bench or something, and you found something else that might not be as beastie, but they were just working better with your structure, for example?
Squats, I went through that with squats, and I went actually further than what I would suggest probably most people do, but I gave them a really good shot. I had squats as a staple for at least a solid decade.
Oh, damn.
Yeah, and I got to where, these weren't like ass to grass squats, but I had 585 on the bar.
Oh man.
And yeah, and I was getting, sort of between the 90 degrees and parallel place, which is where I sort of felt a sweet spot was. And for me, I had, my glutes were gigantic. I grew a gigantic ass from that, and I did not get the leg stimulation that I wanted. And I actually could see that when I went back and looked at some of my stage pictures, where when I was doing those squats, and you could see it actually made my legs look smaller when I would turn around, because I had such good glute development, which in and of itself isn't bad. But it wasn't doing the trick for me, and it just in order to feel kind of comfortable and find a normal kind of groove there. And of course, that was more of a power lifter, low bar type squat that I was just end up working the posterior chain, and not even my hamstrings so much, just mainly just my glutes, and doing that. And if I've actually, a couple of years ago, I went back and I started doing high rep free bar squats, and I found those to be productive. I was just doing widowmakers. I started tossing them in just because I'm kind of a maniac, and I think I documented them for several weeks on Instagram, for maybe several months, just trying to like eke out rep after rep and adding, micro loading the weights. And I got something from that, but going heavy with barbell squats just didn't work for me. And I found now that I can, if I get in a Smith machine, and actually I use a top squat bar attachment, which I get asked about all the time. Topsquat.com used to be where you could get it. Dave Draper came up with this. It's sort of a shoulder saver, so you don't have to pull your arms back around the bar. I just sort of would tear up my shoulders trying to do that. This is a attachment. If you just look up Top Squat, is one word, you can find them.
Is it like a safety bar handle or something?
Yeah, it actually basically turns a barbell or a Smith bar into a safety bar.
Oh.
And I just have it in the back of my car. Just take it with me wherever I go. I've had it for like 15 years now, I think, probably.
Nice.
Yeah, it's great. It really is nice. So I use that. It lets you control the bar, lock and unlock the bar on a Smith machine. And I can squat on a Smith machine because I'm guided into that range of motion, and choose the biomechanical pattern that gives me the activation pattern that I want in the legs. So I can squat and with a Smith bar, and I really like those actually. Those are fun because they got that challenge, like that sort of, I think you call it beastly challenge, that comes along with just like you're getting under the bar. It's just basically you and the bar and gravity going to town. But I would have to just alter my biomechanics so much with heavier loads that it just wasn't working for me. So yeah, I gave up on it, but I gave it a shot. And I think that's one of the things that sometimes it depends on the person's mentality. You can kind of go two directions. Like all these things we've been talking about, there's so much inter-individual variability. Some people will just like, so you got to squat if you want big legs, you got to squat, and because Tom Platt squatted, like it's okay. Tom Platz had the biggest legs, so that was like, that's the entire line of reasoning that they come up with. And then some people were like, well, I'm just not built for squats. And it's like, well, there's something to say for giving it a go. You may just need some time to iron out the right activation pattern, the right squatting form. You know, you may not feel very comfortable doing a high bar Olympic type squat like Tom Platz used, but if it may or may not be that your structure will allow that, but give it some time. Give it a couple years. You have to do it every day, but give it a couple years. And sometimes literally, it's interesting. One of the things I've found, I don't think I've ever mentioned this before on a podcast, but sometimes you find machines that are really well suited. They've got a really nice loading curve, and they're just made for someone of about your size. It seems like it's almost like it's custom made for you, your personal biomechanical, anatomical construction. And it makes it really easy to have a good mind-muscle connection with whatever muscle you're trying to target. And so you literally can get in that machine and fall in love with that one. And then you learn the activation pattern. Literally, you learn how it's supposed to feel when you're connecting really well with a target muscle on that machine. And then when you go back to, let's say, a free weight of some sort, let's say it's a squat. So let's say you've come across like a hammer strength leverage squat machine that is just awesome. A pendulum squat or something like that you've never used before. It's like, this is just beautiful. You know exactly how that feels. And then when you go back to a barbell squat, you've got that motor pattern that you've learned. You know how it's supposed to feel when you're targeting those muscles the way you should. And now you're like, holy shit. It may like literally create almost an epiphany of sorts that, you know what, what if I just put the bar really high and I just say, screw it on the weight. I don't care if I have to, put the 2.5s on each side and nothing else. If I do them like this, it feels just like that machine, which I love, which hits me right where I want. And I can do squats with this just subtle shift. Sometimes it's larger, sometimes it's smaller, but with this sort of mindset in place, and I can take what I learned from that machine and apply it to the bar and get the effect I want. And so you can literally, sort of bring a motor learning pattern, transfer a motor learning pattern from a machine that was like set up to teach you how to have a good mind-muscle connection, and then apply that on other exercises. So that's why I went back to the Smith bar, to the barbell squatting. Like years later, I'm like, I think I've got a better mind-muscle connection now than I did, I've been training for like 38 years, so there's kind of a long gap here. But I'd been quite a few years since I'd barbell squat. I'm like, I'm going to give barbell squatting another shot. I'll use my top squat, and I'm like, what? I feel this. I like how this feels when I do these with a higher rep range. I can do these and make these, I think, an effective leg builder for me. And so that's what I did, and that was because I had so much experience. At least that's my perception of it. So much experience with having done good squatting movements in the way that I want to, with a nice, strong mind-muscle connection, that I then was able to take that mind-muscle connection, those previous experiences, and reapply those years after I'd kind of given up on the barbell squat, and sort of re-enlist that, at least for the time being, as a staple for that year or so that I did that.
Yeah. Do you think it ever happens, and maybe this is something I've heard with you on a podcast, but I could be wrong, that there are just movements which bang you up earlier on in your journey, and then kind of like certain joints just learn to adapt to certain movement patterns? So maybe something that was messing up your knees before, or your shoulders or something, you just kind of have to give it time and they get used to it and it doesn't bang you up anymore. Do you think that ever happens?
I think there are some extra, like I can't even think about doing like a skull crusher without my tricep tendons like starting to ache. So like that one, I don't want to ever come back to. There have been times like when I'm training with someone else and I'm like, let me just try this with the bar, and I can tell right away. But yeah, I think what you're getting at is that you can learn how to produce an activation pattern that I believe it. This is just pure like kind of bro science, in the trenches perception is that you can probably end up learning how to create the preferential better activation patterns that create joint stability, such that an exercise that you tried once that was just you couldn't get to work for you might work better. Like there was sometimes when I've noticed before, and I haven't. I think I've tried this machine. So sometimes hack squats that, like, not the barbell hacks, but machine hack squats at a 45-degree angle that have your feet at sort of a good degree of plantar flexion can cause a lot of shear stress in the knee and the patellofemoral pain. It just, you feel like your kneecaps are about ready just to fly across the room. And there was a machine at one of the gyms back in Arizona that I really wanted to use because they had limited exercise possibilities there. And I would, like, every once in a while, like, okay, my knees are feeling good, I give it a shot. And I mean, I used to just bang myself in the head after like tearing up my knees because I'm like, I should know better. I'd wake up every single time I did those, and my knees would hurt. There's actually it's the same machine, I think a different year, and it's here at a gym in town, and I can't actually, I'm very cognizant of that now, and I can't actually use that, but I have to be really, really focused on form in a way that I probably wasn't before. I probably, using different foot placement, I think, is one thing I know that helps. So feet higher and wider seems to help me. But yeah, I think most definitely you learn how to do those exercises better, and it's really kind of subtle things that if you spend enough time training people or watching people in the gym or having trained with people who've been at it for a long time, there's something to say. Like, there's a subtle, almost ineffable. You could probably discern it, if you're a highly trained biomechanist. But there's something to say for people who just really know how to find what Dante Trudel would call a kind of a power groove in their exercises. They know how to sort of set up the sequencing of the muscle activation and the way in which the muscles are called into play to move the weight. That just does a great job with the mind-muscle connection. Does a great job of avoiding that kind of joint pain, which some people might experience. And like an example that a lot of people can relate to the same sort of thing is how variable it is in people's ability to like just throw. It's amazing. Like, some people, like, you just say, just throw this, you toss them a ball and you say, just try to throw this. And it's like they're a baby fawn trying to walk for the very first time because they've never thrown anything before. And then you look at, like, professional baseball player, or a football player, even ones that aren't quarterbacks, and like they've been throwing their entire lives. And it's just like, they're just having a conversation, and like, it's beautiful. It's like, it's effortless how they throw. And they could do that, again, obviously baseball players have all sorts of joint issues because of how hard they're throwing and what they're doing. But their motor patterns are so dramatically different. And the same thing happens in the gym. I think over time you get better. Take that person who can't throw for shit and, put them in a scenario where they're throwing all the time. Maybe they've got a child and they learn to throw, and they'll learn how to throw. So you can learn how to do exercises and learn how to, like, just become a better, if you can throw a baseball better than a football, and you maybe even get better at throwing, like, things like even a frisbee or something like that. There could be some motor carryover, and especially if you're talking about squatting exercises as a group, you can learn how to become a better activator of the thigh muscles when squatting versus the glutes and the low back, and then carry that over to an exercise that once just didn't work for you because you didn't have the skill level, you didn't have the generalized skill level to carry over and to be able to pick up that skill, and you just get it over the years. So yeah, I think what you're saying is absolutely a possibility because I've seen it myself.
Yeah. One last thing on the exercise selection thing, like, how do you feel about the romanticization, whatever, that's probably not how you say it, of like compound lifts versus isolation? And I guess the most concrete or obvious example here would be something like a knee extension versus a squat purely for the quads. Because, I mean, if you were to actually look at how complete a movement is in terms of targeting that specific muscle group, I mean, a knee extension is pretty much unbeatable if you're looking at the actual profile of the exercise. Like a squat, except for a select few that can just squat like with amazing, like they're just built for the squat completely. Even for them probably, but maybe those would be exceptions. The knee extension should, in theory at least, be actually superior to something like a squat. Like, how do you think that a squat is superior to a knee extension, for example, for some other reason? Or what do you think about this? Hey guys, sorry, just a short interruption. Mainly doing this because people have been asking me a lot in private messages on Instagram and Facebook and email whether I'm doing online coaching, and the answer is actually yes. Maybe I've been doing a bad job promoting this so far, but in each video description, if you go to the show notes, you will always see a Calendly link there where you can book a free call, where we can chat on a call for up to 45 minutes. We can talk about your goals, what you would like to achieve, and whether or not you and I are a good fit for a coach-client relationship and can effectively work together to achieve your goals in the most efficient way possible. So if that is something of interest to you, then you can check the show notes wherever you're listening or watching this. There will be a Calendly link where you can just book that free call and we can move forward from there. So that's all I had to say for now. Let's continue with the show.
That's a phenomenal topic. I love that topic, man.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's because it's one I've thought about, and I have talked about this a few times. And it's just you can dig around this topic in so many different ways. So the first thing that kind of comes to mind is that overall, like it just in progress, and sort of when you said romanticizing the idea of compound movements versus isolation movements, the romantic notion, I think, is based on what people sort of see empirically, like who is making the best gains overall, the people who squat a lot or the people who do lots of knee extensions. And I mean, I've actually seen this. It's always bizarre. Like, I've seen people doing knee extensions while they're reading the newspaper. Anyone can do a knee extension. It's a no-brainer. There are even people I've seen people before who do a knee extension and they look down. They don't even know what muscle they're training. It's right there in front. They can see the muscle contracting. You would think they could locate proprioceptively the muscle that's supposedly being fatigued and aching, but they can't tell which muscle they're using. So the knee extension is a very poor litmus test for someone's desire to train hard to make muscular gains. Whereas a squat is a great indicator, I think. So if you just say, well, who are the people, like, would you rather squat or do knee extensions? And I think if you and ask people to raise their hands and you split them up, and then you said, okay, let's do a double blind, and who has the biggest legs? I think you could probably guess with some accuracy where you're going to find the bigger legs. It's going to be among the people who like to squat. So I think that's where that notion kind of comes from. I think there's really there's a massive amount to that, pardon the pun. There's really a lot to say for what that entails. There's a study that I found. I'm just going to toss this out because it's kind of cool. I just I don't even know how I found it. It's one that I find these studies and I make notes of, to include them in future writings. But it was an interesting study. They had 3 groups, and they trained one group with upper body only training, and it was pretty much a kind of a complete upper body training program. So I don't remember the number of sets total, but they had that group. They had another group that did lower body training only, and it was complete, hamstring curls, knee extensions, squats, calves, et cetera, et cetera. And then the other group was a full body training program. So all the groups trained 3 times a week, and literally the total volume of exercise was about the same. So the full body training group that trained 3 times a week, just like the other 2 groups, didn't do as many sets for upper body or as many sets for lower body. It wasn't like they just combined the upper and the lower body training regimes. They just did a full body training session every day, and they gained more muscle mass. And they just, used BIA. So really, unfortunately, was not the best measure of body composition. But they looked at the follistatin to myostatin ratio. So follistatin inhibits myostatin's actions at the myostatin receptor, and myostatin is not something you want because it slows muscle growth. So they had a greater increase and a greater increase in follistatin, a larger decrease in myostatin. The group that trained their full body 3 times a week, and it makes me kind of wonder. There's lots of ways to look at this. This is something to sort of follow up on, but the full body training seemed to have an effect on full body growth. And the first thing that I thought to myself was, holy shit, gosh, how often, this is talk about old bro science lore, but how often is like people would say, you just got to squat and it'll make your whole body grow. And there's evidence like right there, like literally they were squatting the other group, and there's probably, and talk about hormesis. I've started. So why would this? So the lower body group they were doing the squats too, but maybe like once you get to a certain number of sets, then the effect on follistatin and myostatin is sort of plateaus off, or maybe even becomes too much. They may have been like you're doing too much in training lower body 3 times a week over the course of the full study to get that positive impact on follistatin and myostatin. It may have been like they're beyond the optimization point of that inverse U, and now they're literally sort of pushing towards maybe not completely overtraining because they did make progress, but. So maybe it's, the full body training has something to say, something that has an effect via follistatin and myostatin, because that's what this study showed. It really pointed in that direction. So they didn't tease out that they have some issues because they didn't match volume. The group that did full body didn't do the same volume of lower and upper body as the other 2 groups. But they matched volume overall, and it was actually more ecologically sound because doing both of those programs combined would have been way too much, I think. The number of sets just would have been way too and they were training to failure, so to speak, in this program. So I wanted to toss that in because it does you made me think of it when you mentioned the squatting versus just doing knee extension in terms of quad growth. Is that who knows if there's something to say for maybe sort of that local effect of myostatin and follistatin release. And also there's something to say, I think, for just generally, and this could be at the get-go when you talk about who would rather squat or who would rather do knee extensions. The people who would rather squat are going to be more psychologically inclined to train hard. But doing the harder exercises also, I think, sets the bar for effort level at a higher place than doing just isolation exercises does. And that, I think, is something that carries over. So when it's like, you've done your squats, you've done your leg presses, you've done your heavy lunges, whatever it may be, and now you're just going to do knee extensions or nothing. Like that's just like, and you can blast those, and it doesn't create nearly the inroads into your recovery that those other things do. So relatively speaking, and I mean, there's also some interesting studies. If you look across, and I wrote an article, it's a little bit old now, for Muscle Mag. It's on my website in the discussion section. I think for just anyone can go there. You don't have to register. You can just download it for free. It's on, I think they title it "Discover the Afterburn." It's about excess post-exercise oxygen consumption. And I just looked at all the literature that was available at the time on that. And there's a number of studies showing, well, overall, basically the level of effort that you put forth in general is determinant of the epoch. So if you go do like half an hour or even an hour of like kind of moderate intensity endurance exercise, you won't really get much. If you go all out at like lactate threshold as hard as you can for an hour, you can get an epoch that's maybe 50 calories or something like that. If you do intervals, that's where, this is when people are starting to really want to focus on intervals for fat loss. You can get a more substantial excess post-exercise oxygen consumption. The effort level's there. You sort of see the same thing with resistance exercise. There are a number of studies where they have people go and do like circuit training, so like literally they've got a series of machines and you're doing like, pull down and knee extension and hamstring curl and pec deck, and side lateral machine, overhead press, and it's all like kind of, there's some compound exercise in there, but lots of isolation exercises, and 1 minute rest in between. And most people, you can only go at about what would be around 60% of VO2 max if you're doing circuit training like that. You just don't go all that hard in terms of energy expenditure overall. And they weren't seeing, the epoch was like nothing. And then there's a study by Schenke, Scheunke, where they had, if I believe it was a total of 12 sets, and they measured the epoch over the next like 36 hours. I can't remember the details exactly, but they did I think they did 12 sets total, I think with 2 minutes rest in between. And this actually sort of relate this back to the Schoenfeld study. People can kind of make the comparison in their head. And I think they were doing squats, 4 sets of squats, 4 sets of bench press, and I think 4 sets of like a hang clean, like a power clean, but just like pull off the 4 clean as high as you can. So it wasn't so much of a skill component there. And with 2 minutes rest in between, maybe 3 minutes between the exercises. And there are 8 sets of 8 to 12 to failure. So they're done in and out of there in like, 30 minutes or so. But you can imagine how brutal that was. So do your 10 rep max on a squat. Let's say you can do 315 and you barely get that 10th rep. 2 minutes later, you're getting 10 more. Get back under the bar, buddy. And then 2 minutes later, they're having to adjust the load. You do that again. And then 2 minutes later, you do that again. It's like, okay, now we're going to bench press. Get over here. Maybe they do a warm up set, and now you're taking, and even bench press, a really hard bench press or just a compound bar press to failure, you can get gassed out to some degree on that. And then of course the hang cleans were just crazy. Half an hour, and their epoch was like over 800 calories extended over the 36 hours. And there's another study, I think the first name is Paoli, where they did a rest pause. Yeah, and you've seen that one probably. And they had a tremendous epoch there too. Same kind of thing, taking large muscle group exercises to failure. So there's something's going on there in terms of the overall stress. You see it in terms of the myostatin and the follistatin. You see it in terms of the epoch. Of course, that's going to, assuming you eat enough, that's going to drive your hunger up eventually. You're gonna want to eat. Like there's the total stress that comes on the system from doing, if you can persist in doing squats, you can hang in there and do those year after year. I think that's going to be a better bet overall. And you take two people who are just identically motivated, and you just have them do knee extensions versus squats, and you compare one versus the other. In more of sort of a standardized research setting where you're trusting that your randomization procedures have equalized motivation and all the other factors that might contribute to muscle growth in one versus the other form of training the quads. Then yeah, there's reasons exactly why you said, like the knee extension is just the quad. If you're thinking about what's your likelihood of getting full motor unit activation when you're just doing this quad, it's a smaller muscle group versus the squats. Probably better in the quad because it's just less muscle. Your nervous system has less to worry about there. It's only the quad. You may have better range of motion too if you got a really good knee extension machine. Blah blah blah. All those things apply. But I think in the real world, the people that are squatting are going to do better off, or finding the exercise that's the hardest one they can find, where they have a good, strong mind-muscle connection with. Just not for the sake of like picking the hardest freaking exercise. Like you could do like Zercher squats, that just tear up your arms and just feel awful. Or front squats because they make you feel like you're going to pass out because you're gassing, you can't breathe. I don't like to do front squats for anything more than like 10 reps. I really don't do them much at all because it's like that doesn't let me focus on the muscle mass. So harder is not always better, but harder, there is something to say for those people who will find the hardest exercises to do and will persist in doing them. Like I said, that's sort of a litmus test and an indicator for future success, I think.
Yeah. So since we are coming up on 2.5 hours.
Oh shit, we are. Yeah. Told you, man. I told you.
And this is going to be a part where I'm going to be a shitty interviewer. I'm just going to jump around a little bit with some brief questions.
Speed round.
Speed round. Do you train your abs, and do you think that for people who are lacking a good-looking set of abs, even when they are lean, not like shredded to the bone lean, but For a second, I thought you snapped at me that I'm asking.
That's enough. 2.5 hours is my limit. No, that's Blitzy. There's someone obviously threatening the whole my domicile here, so she's keeping us safe.
Oh, gotcha. So, do you think that for people that don't have a good-looking set of abs when they are lean, it's important for them to train their abs, or it's just a matter of like body fat levels, and if your abs look like shit, then well, that they look like shit?
No, this question, or sort of a variant on this question, came up. Yeah, I do train my abs. Actually, several times a week, either every other day, or actually lately I've been training every time I train, so probably 4 times a week. But I don't do much. The rectus abdominis muscle is, as far as I know, as far as I found, it's mixed fiber type. Any evidence suggesting that you'd want to like do a high rep type training with your abs doesn't hold. You don't want to try to train abs with like sets of 5 because you've got your spine to worry about. But developing a really strong core through doing targeted rectus abdominis training will build big, thick abs, and most people don't have to worry about their obliques being like overblown. Some people do have that issue, and that's kind of a whole other question. But yeah, absolutely. If you really are like completely lean, you're down to like true contest stage, and your abs don't look really pretty good, then it could just be that's just kind of the shape of your rectus abdominis muscle. It just doesn't, the transverse inscriptions there just don't give you the appearance of a really sharp looking six pack. We actually talked about, someone sent me a message. I can't remember which even medium it was sent on, but we talked about this in a podcast, and he said one of the things he noticed when he gets on stage is that his abs will look kind of flat like that until he's filled up. So his abs really need to be carved up, just like any other muscle. And that may be true for people who do higher rep ab stuff, who are training, dieting down in their pre-contest, and their carbs are low, and they're becoming more ab focused than they were before. So maybe their rectus abdominis, the abdominal musculature, is even more glycogen depleted than it would be otherwise, and they get really lean. And now literally the ab musculature is flat in terms of being low on glycogen and water, and they just need to fill up, which is can be a delicate process because you don't want to create distension. You can have, this great turtle shell, but the turtle shell ab look is not what you want. You want the tight abs with the small waist at the same time. So yeah, but I think a lot of times it's just going to be lack of muscle mass there, and you can get that through progressive overload. Just got to be careful. Watch if you have a low back issue. A lot of people have really tight erector spinae muscles. A lot of people have really tight hip flexors, especially. So you just gotta be careful with doing ab training. I would tell most people keep it above at least 12 reps, 15 reps.
No, absolutely.
But it's
actually, I had a recent stint or a recent training block in the past 1 or 2 months where I've been hammering them pretty much daily, and wasn't obsessive over progression and adding weight. I was just focusing on that mind-muscle connection, and I found cable crunches, like basically lying down on a bench and just using the cable stack behind me and sitting up without any feet anchoring, just moving from the upper body. And the range of motion is pretty small. Like someone would look at that and it's like, man, like you should be sitting up completely, but it completely allows me to train my abs without my hip flexors being involved, and it just feels wonderful. It doesn't hurt my back. And the other one is a cable crunch variation, or a cable reverse crunch, basically. So I'm lying also on the bench and hooking up my legs with the glute kickback straps, and just hooking the cable onto that. And just, once again, mind-muscle connection, slight pelvic tilt to tilt my my pelvis up using my lower abs, and it just beats the crap out of the abs and no back pain. And I'm just so happy that I found these, because I was struggling for a long time with either my hip flexors being banged up or getting lower back pain. So
you might try one of my sometimes the best, actually probably more often than not, the best ab machine in many gyms, and this was sort of a running joke, so some people listening to this might laugh, is using a seated hamstring curl.
Yeah, I was hoping that you would bring it up because I saw your video.
Yeah, I got a video. I was doing all sorts of things on there, but those are phenomenal as long as you can safely get your feet in there, and you're not going to hurt yourself otherwise. It's probably a liability issue, but I tell you what, those feel great. Those feel phenomenal. And the thing about ab training, I guess we're going into exercise tips, is like literally, as far as the rectus abdominis goes, the action there is spinal flexion, or if you're doing like kind of reverse crunch, you could call it, a posterior pelvic tilt, so to speak. But basically it's the flexion at the spine, not flexion at the hip, which is what the hip flexors do. So if you're feeling it all in your hip flexors and your rectus femoris, that's not the way to go. I've got another exercise, like really early. I think it's one of my first Instagram posts where I show a variation that I've used a lot in the past, where you get yourself set up on a decline bench that you could just do like decline regular crunches on. And then you have to have strong hip flexors to make this happen. But you lift yourself up to 45 degrees or so, whatever a nice comfortable angle is, and you just hold your hips in place. So there literally is no movement at the hips. And then you allow within your comfort zone, of course, if you have to have a decently strong back and a healthy back for this too, but you can arch your back to basically do the eccentric and then crunch into the concentric. And it's all basically, like you said, a very subtle and small movement, but it's basically spinal extension and spinal flexion with no movement at the hip. So no hip extension, hip flexion. And when I'm teaching people this in the gym, I'll put my hand or like ball my hand into a fist on their low back and say, I just want you to curl your low back over my hand. And maybe I'll even put my hand down kind of near their sacroiliac joint and say, I don't want to feel your hips pressing back and forth into my hand. There shouldn't be any movement at the hip joint here on this. And if you can do just like 10 reps, like in that position where you're leaned back that way and you're sort of like, you're sort of floating in air with the crunch. You've got nothing holding you, supporting your hips in that spot. You've got decent abs and you've got strong hip flexors. Those are very, very difficult to do, but you can see them in that video. You can see that basically it's just what you really want in all your ab exercises, if you're wanting to focus on the abs specifically, is just the flexion at the spine, at the lumbar spine.
Yeah, I'll have to look at that video of yours up. Sounds like.
Yeah, they're tough. I've had people try them. So I can't do one of those. I'm like, okay, that's good. At least you're doing it the right way. People, it's not at all a sit-up. People just want to flop back and forth and do a sit-up. But it's not a sit-up. It's just the crunching portion at the lumbar spine minus any of the hip flexion movement. They're very tough.
Yeah. And then another quick question, doesn't have to be answered in a quick manner, but how do you feel about deloads, pre-planned versus autoregulation? And what I'm doing, I don't do any pre-planned deloads, basically, where I'm like, okay, I'm going to accumulate for 4 weeks and then I'm going to take 1 week at submaximal weights or whatever. It's just like I take it one session at a time. And if I cannot hit my rep target on a given exercise, then depending on the exercise and how taxing it is, I will reduce loads and maybe just abort subsequent sets altogether. Or if something hurts, obviously, I'm just going to maybe skip the exercise. If, let's say, I was going to do squats and something feels off, or if I'm just like, man, I just don't have it today, maybe I'll just do leg extensions instead and some glute work, or maybe just skip that exercise altogether. And, if something, I just feel like my performance is not up there, I'm just going to reduce the load a little bit and do some higher rep kind of pump work on that exercise. And there's kind of my micro deloads in many sessions, and they kind of sprinkle in and they add up over the course of the year. So that's how I deload. Do you think that that's being reckless, or what do you think about the whole deload thing?
You're training like an asshole, man. I just have to tell you. I'm just totally joking. Totally joking. No, that's, I think, so the issue with autoregulation, of course, is that it is a subjective process. And, I have a friend of mine, actually, she just tried to call me not long ago, and she used to always say, I don't know, I live in here. That was her response to things. She's like, I can't tell, like, I'm from the outside because I live in here. I'm actually on the inside. So having pre-planned deloads, or at least using those or forcing those upon yourself for someone who's not entirely absolutely 100% certain that they can auto-regulate to the best of their ability in a way that behooves them maximally, is a good way to kind of check in on that. So it's like, if you're moving along and you're thinking, I'm doing pretty good, and if I had my druthers, I'd just kind of auto-regulate in this way, the way I'm doing. I just keep on keeping on, and you self-impose a forced deload, and you come back, and you're like, holy shit, wow, I had no idea. Like I was sort of like, I was definitely functionally overreaching here. I've got some progress that I was missing out on because I wasn't pulling back and deloading. Then that would tell you that you may have to institute those now and again. But if you don't find that that's the case, and you just find like it's not doing much for you, then what you're doing is like there are pieces of the way you do things that I've put into fortitude training. You may have recognized this when you read the book, but one of the things that I have people do is auto-regulate their exercise selection. So there's 3 set types there. The loading sets are the ones that you really are kind of you've chosen unto yourself. These are the ones you can grow with, that you choose to do, that you want to do, and you rotate amongst those and progressively try to kick the logbook's ass on a regular basis. And so those are sort of as close to set in stone. But even those, if you go in, you're like, you get under the squat bar and you're like, I got a niggle in my hip. This isn't a smart day to push the squats, and you don't do it. You just have to have some common sense. But the other set types, the muscle rounds, and especially the pump sets in fortitude training, are auto-regulated in pretty much exactly the way you explained. So you go in and you say, this happened just was it yesterday for me? Yeah, it's like there will be days when I go in and it's like, man, I just like, I want to just kick the shit out of my back today, and I will go, and it's a muscle round day, and I've just done rack deads previously for the loading sets. But there's just something, I slept well, all the stars in the moon have aligned, and I want to go for it. So I'll end up doing like, T-bar rows and bent over barbell rows or something like that. Kind of the 2 kind of heaviest, most neurally taxing exercises just because I feel like I can handle those. And then other days be like, okay, low back's tender. We need to kind of chill here, and I'll do like a supported machine row, something like that. And that is a way to auto-regulate literally throughout the course of your training cycle, which in your case is sort of a continuous one to keep things going. And yeah, I mean, it's funny. Like there's something to say, and it's always a balance. There's something to say for being hard nosed and wanting to push yourself. And in probably your average trainee, average gym goer, most of whom have dropped out by the 12 months after they signed up for their membership. So that kind of tells you about their level of consistency and direction and their fortitude, pardon the pun. Is you want to have that. You want to be able to sort of say, I'm going to do this come hell or high water. This is what's on the docket for today. I'm going to kick ass and take names no matter what. But if you're heading, if it says drive 60 miles an hour in this direction and you see the wall coming, then you should make a turn. Don't run into the wall if you know it's there. That's just silly. And that's something that I figured out years ago. It took me quite a while to figure it out. And having talked to lots of people, John Meadows is one person who talks about this a good bit, is that you just have to train smart too if you want to keep doing this for as long as possible. And what I've found, one of the greatest things that I've found in getting feedback about fortitude training is people, older guys, who have not quite known how to avoid those injuries that just keep on recurring, because in the system, literally the dictate is to auto-regulate exercise selection based on how you feel on that particular day. And you can even jump volume tiers if you need to keep things moving. They find that those little injuries, those nagging injuries, tend to sort of fade away. The stretching probably helps, but just going and continually doing an exercise that just re-aggravates a chronic overuse type of injury because it's on your training plan is just sort of silly. There'll be plenty of decades to squat in the future. The bar is not going anywhere, and gravity's going to be around for a long time, so you can always come back to it. But if you create an injury, I mean, I talked to somebody, he's an IFBB pro here in town. He's actually got great longevity, but it was about a year ago. And so when I was doing those barbell squats, and he's like, what's that thing for? And it was my top squat. So I use this to squat. And he's like, you still squat? I said, yeah, I still squat. Squat as much as I can. I love to squat, I mean, he just meant kind of squat in general. He doesn't squat. He just does leg presses because he's, it's just so, and it was like you still squat? Like how can you possibly still be doing that? And it's like, well, I don't squat on days when I don't feel like it makes sense to squat. You just don't do it. So what you're doing, I think, is good for long-term health. And you also you're staying away from the heavy loading stuff that seems like it really kind of taxes the connective tissue more so than is worth the potential stimulus that you get. That makes sense too. So you can do that. So as long as your psychology is staying high and you're being honest about whether you're just being obsessive and you feel like if I took time off, I wouldn't know what the fuck to do with myself.
Yeah.
So there's something to say for that. So as far as if you're asking for, my advice, I think you've got a lot of really awesome components in place, but it would be interesting to see just once a year, if you took a week off, and don't plan for that week by intentionally sort of driving yourself into the ground so that you feel okay about taking the week off. Just keep doing what you're doing as if you were going to not have that week off, and take the week off for 5 days or something substantial. That's really a complete divergence from your normal training regimen where you're not doing anything, and come back and see what happens. And that would give you, the checkpoint. Because like my friend says, you live in there, so you don't know until you sort of step out of your routine, stop training for a while. And you don't have to do that every 3 months. I don't think having a forced deal at every 4 weeks, if you're making good progress, that's just silly, I think. But every once in a while to kind of check yourself, I think makes sense. Because I mean, I have to do this. One thing I have to try to keep in my head is sort of the fact that I really don't know shit. The more I start to learn, the more I realize I don't know a whole hell of a lot. So I have to have kind of a beginner's mindset. It's like, okay, there's all sorts of things I could be completely wrong about. There's certain things I'm pretty sure about, but nothing's ever certain. So, I mean, who knows? Maybe I've been doing this wrong for 30 years. It's possible. And I've been making progress despite myself. So I'm open to new stuff. And so keeping that in place it actually makes things fun because it opens up opportunities for exploration, that kind of stuff. But it's also a good way to, I think, keep from actually hurting yourself and continuing to do stuff that isn't in your best interest.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, in paper it may sound crazy what I'm doing for a lot of people, but actually if you're looking at what I'm actually doing, I'm one of the most conservative people that I know in the gym with
Right.
the things that I'm doing. So it's important to keep that in mind. Can I ask you one last question, which I really wanted to get to, but if you gotta go or you have a hard stop, I'm completely understanding of that.
No, it's good, man. Let's do it. Finish strong.
Cool. So the very last thing I want to get into is that you're someone who likes being an animal in the gym and like to push yourself to the limit. And I myself am like that as well, just in different ways, maybe more so in the volume quantity component and not so much in the effort component. But the thing is that tends to get into other areas of life as well, where it's just hard to switch off. And obviously we know that recovery and sleep are very important. And it's always refreshing for me to hear when other people that I look up to are also bad sleepers, naturally, because I'm a horrible sleeper. And pretty much anything I do in life that is bad, such as under eating or dieting or something, anything that imposes stress on me immediately impacts my sleep. And sometimes even making great progress in the gym and being enthusiastic about that, even that impacts my sleep because I'm just too excited. I literally stopped reading like nonfiction, business, and inspirational kind of books before bedtime because it's like, fuck, I'm getting inspired instead of getting sleepy here. Like, I cannot do this. So I'm literally only reading like these dumb football player biographies before bed that are kind of crap, but at least they put me to sleep.
That makes sense, though.
Yeah, like literally I'm trying to be as dumb and shallow in the evening as possible. Just nothing that hypes me up. So I'm wondering, like, how do you go about both being able to be a beast when you need to be, but also just switching off and chilling when that's appropriate? Like, what are some strategies that helped you?
Well, it's fun. It's interesting because there have been times in the years past when I would sort of focus my anger, focus my stresses, focus my dissatisfaction, the things that piss me off during the day, and sort of channel those and try to like let those out in the gym and make that sort of my outlet. And I think that works for some people, works really well. Literally, that can be a time where you go in and sort of empty that stuff. And every once in a while God, it's pretty rare now that actually happens. But every once in a while, something will creep into my mind just because, something happened. It was, frustrating enough to make me think about it again. But for the most part, when I'm in the gym, I'm probably the closest person that I've ever sort of seen train, and I do this like when I'm alone, if I'm training at my home gym here, or one of the gyms that I've got a membership here I got because I can go in early in the morning and there's no one there. Literally, I have the whole gym to myself, and I'll be kind of like Ronnie Coleman. If you ever watch some of his videos where he's just talking to himself and having fun and screaming, it's like literally kind of a party. And I'm that guy every once in a while. I don't think about it too much, but I'm that guy that's singing sometimes to himself. He's like totally out of tune, and he thinks he's singing, perfectly with the song on his headset, but I know I'm not. But I'm just having fun. Like literally, it's like Ronnie's getting all whooped up to do like an 800-pound squat or whatever. That goes through my head a lot of times. Like I'm having fun with things. So that sort of animalistic tear into it type of perspective is not one that I really have to turn off, because what I'm doing in the gym is just a continuation of having fun and enjoying life. It's kind of the same thing as if you're like cruising down the highway with the top down, and you've got a good song on the radio, and you're just having a good time. So it's fun, it's positive, it's joyful. It's even when all the pain is there and all the drive is like, this is like, it's like driving a sports car, like you're screaming down the Indy 500 runway. It's exhilarating. It's positive. So it's not something I necessarily want to turn off. It's sort of like, you can imagine if someone, let's say they did like, the Indy 500, and they just, or they just ran a really fast race and they plopped down and they're just like, that was awesome. That was great. That fucking rocked. and they sit down and they relax, and they went from a one sort of joyful, highly energized, ecstatic state that was full of happiness and was pleasurable, to a relaxed, pleasurable state that they have afterwards. And that actually happens with exercise. We did a study once, back to the research, a study once where we would do like a 10-minute all-out cycling effort, literally as hard, to set the resistance as high as you could go for 10 minutes, barely finish the thing, max effort, and then we'd have to jump into an MRI and get an MRI done to look at activation of the muscles of the leg. And I'd be asleep in like 5 minutes before the MRI was over, literally be out. So you can do that if you just relax. And it was like really nice to be done with that exercise bout. And it was just awesome. It was actually fun too, because everyone was there yelling at us because it's a really high effort bout. So I don't have to like, there's not like an off switch that I sort of need for sleep, but just sort of, for me at least, this is just sort of the way it works in my head. But I know that if like, I mean, there's some really awesome like YouTube motivation speech compilation videos that like I haven't done this recently, but you play some of those and like you don't have a choice. You have to go to the gym and do something because they just want to make you kick ass and take names. So I don't run into that so much as far as my sleep issues. Mine tend to be, I don't have trouble falling asleep, but I had trouble staying asleep. Yeah. So, and I'm working on that. I've gotten better on that actually. So, but yeah, it's not a mindset thing so much. So I wish I could give you a better answer, man, but it sounds like you've got it solved to some degree.
Yeah, I actually, it's funny because I saw the blue blocking glasses that you're using, and I'm using the same. It's the UVEX thing, right?
Okay, right, yeah, the cheap ones.
Yeah, I'm using the same thing. It doesn't look that cool, but yeah, it seems to be really freaking working. So I'm really glad about that.
Oh, good. You put them on when you wake up at night. If you have to get up and move around, you put them back on.
Absolutely.
Yep. Smart.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Awesome. So yeah, sweet. We finished strong. We didn't quite make it to 3 hours, but I'm super grateful that someone as prestigious and smart and whatever, not gonna be too much of an R slicker for the end. Let's not ruin this. But I'm super grateful that you took this much time. So I really appreciate this almost 3 hours that you gave of your time for this podcast. And please just let people know where they can find your services, products, resources, and anything that you would like them to check out.
I think I'm gonna try to make this last like 10 minutes so we can make the 3 hour mark explaining how to find my stuff. No, really, this is a blast. I literally, you can probably tell I could do this all day long. I really love chatting about this stuff, and people seem to like it. I get so much awesome positive feedback that it's self-perpetuating. So
and you know what, like, it's so awesome that, because I see a lot of people that have been in the game for as long as you are, and I can see that they are just fed up with the whole thing, and they are just sick of people asking similar questions all the time and the mental masturbation, and it's just so amazing to see someone like you still being as passionate about it as you are. Like, it is really inspiring. I just have to say that.
Thank you. I'm definitely not perfect. I get asked, a lot of people ask me medical questions, and I just can't answer those. They'll want to know about an injury or what have you, and I feel bad. I have to pull them away. So that one will continue to come back at me, and I do get those questions, and I do my best to redirect. So I'm not perfect. I have some days when I'm just kind of like, oh Jesus, not this again. But I feel pretty blessed in that, because I know what you mean. It's a difficult thing, but I think I managed to be lucky enough to have found kind of the right place from my perspective to settle, where I'm just managed to be full of gratitude, more so than frustration most of the time. And so I'm just lucky. I can't pin that down to anything that I did. It just kind of happened. But where to find me? So Fortitude Training is the name of my training system. And I've sort of dumped one of my big thoughts. We didn't really cover this so much today, is that, and this relates to this sort of the state of the industry, which you alluded to, is that there's so much to be had from being, I guess, a bit more like I am. I'm obviously biased, and being sort of more of a tinkerer and a learner, and sort of figuring these things out that come along with bodybuilding on your own, because there's just an intrinsic value in having done that and figured it out and on your own, as opposed to being sort of told what to do in an XYZ step 1, 2, 3 type of way that a lot of coaches will do now. So there's been a perspective that's sort of grown really pretty largely in the industry that you kind of need a coach. And all this is just way too complicated to figure out on your own, and so you're gonna have to hire somebody. And so my book that I came out with last year is Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach, and basically it's just sort of my perspective on pretty much kind of A to Z. It's not like you have to follow exactly the steps that are in there. In fact, the whole idea is that you find your own way, literally. That blindly following someone who tells you that they're your Buddha, that they're your coach, they're the the next coming of all things knowledgeable in bodybuilding is probably the person you want to run away from, because you can figure out a lot of this stuff on your own. So I sort of put down my thoughts, and it's sort of a repository and reference guide for everything from my thoughts on intermittent fasting as of the state of literature last year, and what's in Scott's gym bag, to the 20-page section on how I do peak week without pharmaceutical diuretics, how to structure your entire bodybuilding year, fats, macros. I have a nutritional hierarchy of importance. I have a personal bodybuilding inventory, so you can kind of check in on yourself and see where you are. I've got I think 2,400 references in there. So if you buy the ebook, it's hyperlinked, so you can bounce around and dig into all the rabbit holes that I opened up with the references in there if you want to go into some of the topics, some of which we've talked about today. So that's at BeYourOwnBodybuildingCoach.com or BYOBBCoach.com. Or if you just Google Scott Stevenson, you'll go to my website. All the URLs lead you to the same place, and you can get that. So that's the one that, and it's on hardcover on Amazon. People are loving the hardcover on this. It's kind of cool. I probably will never do an ebook again, just because this one got pirated. So now people can buy it for like nothing. All over the place. I don't sell any ebooks pretty much because people can get it for I don't know what it is. So if you really want to get it and you want to be honorable about intellectual property and that sort of thing, then you can get it from me at the BYOBBCoach.com. So that's my big plug, man. And Muscle Minds, the podcast that you didn't even know about, is out there too.
Yeah, man, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Like, how the hell? Yeah, but I will definitely binge listen to that come today. So
yeah. There's, I think if you go on Facebook to Advices Radio, that's where you'll find a group. And if you ask to be in there, I think I can let people in. But Scott McNally hosts the podcast on the Think Big Podcast Network. He can get you in there. We have a Q&A thread for people. So you can get in there and ask a question if you want, or anybody can, which is let you in. I think the group's closed. I'm trying to get him to open it up. I think it makes more sense. But maybe it's just trying to keep the trolls out. But yeah, that podcast's been going on for years. So we do that every other week. And we generally go for a couple hours, so plenty of time for questions. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, Dr. Scott, thank you so much for being on. It was an absolute pleasure chatting with you.
You're welcome, brother. My pleasure.
All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, then please, once again, consider dropping a 5-star rating on iTunes. It would mean a lot to me, and it would be truly helpful. And if you're interested in more cool stuff, then you could visit my YouTube channel. If you type in Sustainable Self-Development Podcast there, or even SSD Podcast, it will come up. And if you're interested in working together with me, then you can check out the Calendly link in the show description. There you can book a free call with me. We can hop on that call, chat about your goals, challenges, determine if we are a good fit. And if that is the case, then we could be working together going forward to get you to the results that you want. So that's all I had to say for today. I hope you enjoyed this once again. And with that, see you next time.